Good morning to CHOW. Good morning to you all who make CHOW what it is. We are about to get started. If you could all please find your seats. Wow. CHOW very good. CHOW participants. I've never seen such control over the power of the mic. Thank you all very much. I think your attention is a sign of how much interest we have in our opening keynote address. So I wanted to first introduce myself for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure to meet. My name is Dawn Martin. I am the Vice Chair and Treasurer of the Board of Trustees for the Sanctuaries Foundation, and have been a long ocean conservation activist, and very excited to be able to be with you here this morning. The foundation is Capitol Hill, to host Capitol Hill Oceans Week here again at the museum in Washington, D.C. For over a decade now, the foundation has been leading the nation's ocean policy conversation. And as we continue to advance the conversation around the ocean this year, I would encourage how we can go on to ask how we can go deeper. Cue going deeper. I'm not going to move. Wow. So a great opportunity for us to just center ourselves, focus on why we are all here today. It's an amazing, beautiful, and wonderful resource that you're all working to protect. And as a result of all of our interests, we have an opportunity here to go really deep on some of the topics that we're currently facing us, whether it's blue parks and protected areas, digital tracking and enforcement of international illegal fishing, innovations in marine debris, Gulf restoration, addressing diversity and inclusion in our ocean conservation movement, domestic aquaculture, offshore energy development, and so much more. And so I'd like to take this chance, and I hope we'll be able to do it again, to thank all of our speakers and participants, and in particular, all of you, for joining us this week to be part of this conversation. And of course, a big thank you to our presenting sponsors, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. Department of Interior, the Walton Family Foundation, and all of our sponsors who have helped to make this event possible. All of our sponsors, the CHOW agenda, speaker bios, and social media information are available at your fingertips at the new CHOW App Store. That's available in the App Store, as well as, of course, the Google Play Store, BlackBerry World, and Windows Phone Store, or directly online at eventmobi.com/CHOW16. I was going to ask you all if you remembered all those spots, but you could probably figure it out. Just make sure you get on the app. It's a really awesome way to keep current. Everyone to join and we invite everyone to join the conversation on social media using the hashtag #CHOW2016. And so now, without further ado, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce this year's keynote, Christy Goldfuss, Managing Director for the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Christy is a strong champion in the administration for our national parks, protected areas, and, of course, national marine sanctuaries. As the head of CEQ, Christy advises the President on environmental and ocean policy issues in particular, helping to shape the administration's blue legacy. She is spearheading implementation of the President's Climate Action Plan, protecting America's lands and waters, and leading the administration's Every Kid in the Park initiative. Following her keynote address, we'll have a short Q&A session. For those of you in the room, we have cards available that you'll find on all of your seats. And our volunteers will be around the room collecting them from you. And for our online audience, remember that you could submit questions over Twitter with hashtag CHOW 2016. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Christy Goldfuss.
Good morning, everyone. It is so good to see so many familiar faces out there and such a packed room. I must admit personally that I got to sit up here on the stage and do a panel last year with Dr. Holdren, good friend Dr. Holdren, and Juliet Elprin. And I had this little hope that a year from now I would be able to take the stage by myself and do a keynote. So I'm really happy to be here this morning. Happy National Oceans Month, and also Pride Month, Great Outdoors Month, and National Hurricane Preparedness Month. However, you should all feel very comfortable. Disney only has one blockbuster movie, and that is Finding Dory, coming out this month. So I think we're doing pretty well with ocean being on top as a public conversation. I'm thrilled to be here to kick off Capitol Hill Oceans Week and have the opportunity to talk about how we're working to ensure that our oceans are a critical component of our global climate action. While we all know that climate change is impacting people across the globe every day, these impacts sometimes feel distant, as if they will happen far, far in the future. And I would argue when it comes to our oceans, the feeling of distance and disconnection are even greater, as most people don't see what's happening in the oceans. Over this past year of historic global action on climate, I have wondered if this disconnection and distance has caused the oceans to be mostly left out of the global conversation on climate change. Let me give you one very high-profile example that I'm sure everyone in this room noticed. But on Earth Day, we marked a historic moment in the fight to protect our planet for future generations. Secretary Kerry, joined by his granddaughter, signed the Paris Climate Agreement in New York, along with nearly 170 other countries. That was the most ever in one day. It was a major accomplishment, but our marine resources and ecosystems were really not part of this. This happened in Paris. This happened despite the fact that our oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface, produce at least half of the oxygen we breathe, and provide fish for more than half the world's population. Numbers cannot and should not be ignored. We cannot truly have a conversation about protecting our planet for future generations without addressing the impacts of climate change on our ocean and marine resources. That is the challenge and discussion I would like to have with all of you today. As thought leaders, scientists, and advocates for the oceans, how can we connect people with climate impacts in the oceans? How can we use this week, Capitol Hill Oceans Week, the World Conservation Congress, and then also our Oceans Conference in the fall, to ensure that action to protect our oceans is seen as an integral part of our strategy to protect the planet from the impacts of a changing climate? Let me propose that one way to answer those questions is for all of us, everyone in this room, to be unified storytellers about what we know and what we see in the ocean. We can lift up, we can retell and highlight what's happening. And the very best subjects for those stories literally live in communities that are literally living on the edge, along our coasts, where they see changes happening before their very eyes, threatening food supplies, health, economic stability, and much, much more. Here are a few of the stories I'd like to share because they're the ones that have stuck with me over this past year. Let's start in the Northeast, a familiar story to all of you. Fishermen who have been doing the same job for decades are experiencing the oceans have come hand. Warming oceans have contributed to declines in many species that cannot survive warmer temperatures, including the historic collapse of the region's cod population. And at the same time, many fish that were once rare in the region have now become common. And in my recent trips up to the Northeast, I can tell you these stories are something the fishermen share between each other constantly. One New England lobsterman's fishery was devastated by black sea bass, a species usually found in the mid-Atlantic that have now moved north due to warming waters. Another fisherman has started regular tilefish, southern species like tilefish, mahi-mahi, and the torpedo ray in waters where those species were once rarely found. These changes are real and they're happening. Businesses and threatening the future of the businesses and marine life that the region so depends on. There's nothing distant about that. That's happening right now. They see it every day. In fact, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recently released the first of several assessments to analyze the impacts of climate change on fish stocks and fishing-dependent communities. NOAA found that in the Northeast, warming oceans are threatening the majority of commercial seafood stocks, including lobster, shrimp, scallops, and other populations of fish that are regularly seen on plates across this country. These impacts will affect not only the consumer, but the fishermen who catch them and the very communities that depend on them. I know there are a host of reasons, and it is complicated. Or shouting, fishermen are not out telling the bow. They're shouting these stories from the bow. In the meantime, there are other authentic voices, many of them right here in this room, that can bring these stories to life, connecting people to what the fishermen experience. As for the next story, I want to travel to a place I may lose half of my staff to by the end of this administration, Hawaii. Yesterday, I had the distinct pleasure of meeting 9-year-old girl who's sitting right here in the second row, Kahala, and her grandfather, Saul. They're visiting from Lanai, the smallest inhabited island in Hawaii. While we were talking, Kahala presented me with a coral and volcanic rock statue that she had made to remind me of the place she and her family hold so dear. She loves to go to the beach to watch the sea turtles, but it means so much more to her. It's about her language, it's about her family. Her message to me was about the importance of conservation in the face of climate change and how we must do all we can to protect the incredible ocean resources we have. That coral now sits on my desk. It serves as a happy reminder of Kahala and her family, but it also reminds me of the need to act. The statistics in Hawaii are staggering. Water temperatures are 3 to 4 degrees higher than average, leading to an unprecedented rate of coral bleaching in the region. And the problem is even worse elsewhere around the world. Acidification, warming ocean temperatures, acidification, and other impacts of climate change are having massive and lasting impacts on marine ecosystems. As I'm sure all of you have seen in the news, record-breaking ocean temperatures have caused the longest global Great Barrier bleaching ever observed in the Great Barrier Reef. Scientists are now reporting that only 7% of the reef has escaped bleaching and that as much as 1/3 of the reef is dead. As much as 1/3 of the Great Barrier Reef is dead. Sadly, we expect that many reefs across the world will face similar mortality. Thanks to Kahala and her grandfather, I have both their stories and the coral to remind me that there is so much more for all of us to do. That same passion for oceans and experience of growing up in Hawaii to take President Obama to take strong climate action and protect our planet, ocean, for future generations. When the president talks about climate action, he is talking about land, water, and wildlife, protecting the very things that he saw when he was 5 and 8 years old snorkeling, and that he really wants to make sure his daughters and then his grandkids get to see far in the future. As climate change drives, we must provide ecosystems, we must provide special places to help sustain biodiversity and preserve these incredible resources. We can and must build resilience into these ecosystems by setting aside places of refuge, free of other stresses and other impacts. That's why I'm excited to announce an action that will do just that today. This has been a long time coming, 30 years to be exact, but today, NOAA is proposing to expand the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary in the Gulf of Mexico. After more than 30 years of scientific studies, including numerous analyses following the 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster, the recommended expansion will protect critical habitat off the coasts of Texas and Louisiana, including 15 threatened and endangered species of whales, sea turtles, and corals. That's what the press release says. But what I loved when I got the opportunity to learn about this place was a particular fish that caught my attention. It's a fascinating fish called a wahoo. As I learned about the sanctuary, I learned that it can swim up to 60 miles an hour. And from my perspective, anything that can move that fast on its own is pretty impressive. So we're thrilled to be able to take these steps today. And as we look to the end of the administration, we are motivated more than ever to continue to prioritize the protection of our marine resources and ensure that healthy oceans and coasts are critical components of our global climate action. Also, I can tell you that national marine sanctuaries like flower garden banks and marine protected areas can be great subjects to use when trying to erase this distance and disconnection that people sometimes feel with the ocean. Through zoos and aquariums, we have this opportunity, just as we saw in the movie at the beginning here, we have the opportunity to animate the corals and wildlife that spark curiosity. We have established portals to the public to bring both the beauty and the problems to life. But it's about focusing on the subject of that ecosystem that grabs people's attention, as we saw with the black coral recently. Some of you may have seen the studies that came out recently about the black coral that was discovered near Papahanaumokuakea. Every headline referenced the oldest marine organism living on Earth. That captures people's imagination. That makes them read the story and learn that much more about this incredible place that they sometimes feel disconnected from. So let's shift to another part of the planet that is both distant and has motivated action for decades: the Arctic. The compelling nature of the stories in the Arctic match the intense need for action. Of those living on the edge, it's the communities in the Arctic that are experiencing the impacts of climate change faster than anywhere else on the planet. These changes are happening at such a pace that they are upending the very fabric of ecosystem function, which is what the communities up there really rely on. For example, we just recently met with a community from Point Lay in northwest Alaska that relies on the local walrus population for subsistence purposes. But due to the loss of sea ice, the walrus can no longer keep their pups near them as they have, and they need to go off and forage, so they've been forced to move closer to where humans live. Apparently, as we learned from these folks, and many of the scientists in the room may know this, walruses spook really easily. So the closer they move to where humans live, the closer they are to hearing very normal noises such as a dog, and then causes a stampede, and then leads to the loss of walrus life. The community is uncertain what will happen to them if we start seeing a decline in the walrus population, because they depend on that food source in the long, long winter months. This is just one example of how the profound shifts in ecosystems and the physical environment in the Arctic could drastically alter the livelihoods of remote communities. Yet, even as these communities face negative impacts, these challenges will open up some new economic opportunities in the region as well. As the Arctic ice sheet continues to recede, we expect that the volume of commercial marine shipping through the Bering Strait and along the north slope of Alaska will double over the next 15 years. That's opportunity for some. That's scary for a lot of others. Shipping will double in the Bering Strait in the next 15 years. New avenues for commerce can offer new economic opportunity, but these vessels can also pose a threat to communities along the slope who rely on marine resources that are sensitive to noise and spills and other forms of marine pollution. This is why we're advancing a new model for Arctic leadership, and which we share with the Canadians and which we are working to advance in other nations around the Arctic. This vision includes the need to take a precautionary, science-based approach to resource management in the Arctic, and importantly says that we must consider the potential impact any new commercial development may have on our long-term climate goals before allowing it to proceed. This will act as sort of like a climate lens or a climate screen for all that we do in the region. There is much more to come on this topic, honestly, much more to come on this topic, as we have already committed ourselves to setting new, ambitious conservation goals by the end of the year. The Alaska Native community is far from monolithic in their feelings about development, but they do recognize, they do see the massive changes happening around them. The Arctic is warming at twice the speed of the rest of the world. What we saw last year with the president's trip up to the region, his really historic trip, was that these communities could make climate change real for the White House press corps. If they can make it real for the White House press corps, I would offer they can do it for a far less cynical audience than that group very well as well. They are amazing stories happening on about both what's happening on the land and what's happening in the sea. Embracing marine conservation opportunities, supporting sustainable fisheries, and investing in communities in the places that are most impacted, such as the Arctic, are all critical components of securing resilience in our ocean ecosystems. We must also take new progressive approaches to ocean governance. I don't want to leave this one out because this is definitely one of my favorite, and Sam Weber from my team is spending a lot of time on this. In terms of ocean governments, if we are to be successful as marine stewards in the face of climate change, our land embraces, national ocean policy embraces this way of thinking and really focusing on results in the development of 2 regional marine plans. One of those regional marine plans has gone out. The other, I promised last week, and the other, I promise you, will be out by the end of this month. So our commitment to getting those done by the end of this administration is well on track. As we increasingly experience the more important than ever change, it is more important than ever for us to invest in the resilience of our marine resources for the billions of people around the world that depend on our oceans for their food, health, economic security, and so much more. But I return to the point, we also need stories. We also need to tell the stories connected to these facts. We all know the facts. We need to talk more about the stories that erase the feelings of disconnection and distance. These are the stories of the people and communities living on the edge and what they're seeing every day, whether it's the change in fish populations threatening a business, the loss of a food source for a subsistence community, or simply watching the sea turtles for a very motivated 9-year-old who is now fighting to protect our planet. We know that our actions are changing our oceans. It is up to all of us. It is up to every single one in this room to be the best darn storytellers that you can be over this year. So never again will it be palatable for the oceans to be such a small part of our collective action. We will have many opportunities over this year to test that theory. So I ask all of you to join us, join the administration as we talk about the oceans and we talk about all that they mean to this president who's really made climate change his legacy issue. Join us in this conversation as storytellers, and I guarantee you, you will be very excited and have a lot to celebrate at next year's Our Oceans Conference. At next year's Capitol Hill Oceans Week. I'm ahead of myself by months. So thank you for having me here. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you. Isn't that just exciting to hear about all the great work in the Arctic and with communities around the world? Just always in our presence is always exciting and a good reminder for us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 minutes now for some Q&A. I have some cards that people gave to me as I walked in, and other volunteers will be collecting them around the room. So please wave your hand, and someone will come and pick them up from you or add them on the Twitter site. So, Christy, I'd like to start with a special thank you for, of course, being here, but for raising the issue of climate change to this community. This is not a new issue for this community, and elevate the issues for decades now have been elevate the issues around climate, a lot of the supporters around these issues, whether members of Congress and or other policymakers, funders, et cetera, that help support our work, say, oh, that's a climate change issue. It's not an ocean issue. And just 2 weeks ago, I had the chance to chair a session on a climate change conference with Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Whitehouse, and he came to the climate conference and says, what's going on here, folks? You're talking about climate issues, and you're missing the ocean. That's the key issue. So there's a disconnect within our community, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how we can better integrate these two issues, and perhaps maybe which of the top issues that you talked about, acidification or warming waters, species migration, what do you think are the compelling messages to help connect these two?
It's a great question. And as I mentioned, in Paris, it was really, I think, shocking, especially to have Secretary Kerry, who does care so much about the oceans, leading those talks and negotiations, and struggling myself to figure out what is it, why is there disconnect? Even before this conference, spoke to a lot of folks, and I said, can you send me whatever the best speech is that you've heard about the oceans and climate change, whatever the best paper is that you have that connect these two issues, even if it's in layman's terms or if it's super scientific and I can turn it into layman's terms, send it my way. Everyone said to me, oh, I've got my favorite speech. Not a single person sent me anything. And so I still,
Action, ladies.
As we do this, and I am not joking in this request and call to action of where are the best stories for us to highlight when it comes to climate in the oceans. For me, what I think is most compelling is the warming oceans, because you can see the impacts of it. And quite frankly, if we're going to break through, I mean, there is an climate action that we can attach our story to, and we will be successful. But we have to be able to make that leap and make it simple for people. So the oceans are warming at whatever the rate is in the particular region, and that means we no longer have cod. Cod's not coming back. That is something that people in the Northeast understand. So I think there's a bit of a struggle sometimes with the science and making sure that we have the absolute clearest connection and science to prove that. I think we have lots of science now that makes this connection, and now we just have to be comfortable over again if we want to tell over and over again.
Perfect. Thank you very much. As we all know, in the debates raging in the media these days, sometimes facts and science don't really matter. But
I didn't say that. They always matter.
It is, I mean, for media attention. But it is something that we are very solid and secure in our arguments here. So thanks very much. Shifting gears a bit, I wonder if you can, reading one of the cards that came in, tell us where you see the National Marine Sanctuary System in the next 10 years. And do you feel like it can reach the same level of recognition with the American public as national parks, actually, something near and dear to your heart?
That is a very high bar, especially in 10 years to reach that bar. I think the challenge of comparing national parks and the blue parks is really that disconnection, and how do we make it more accessible for all Americans to get there. I mean, there is something very easy about Yosemite and packing the car and getting on that trip. But as the entire movement, as all the work that you do progresses, and we really do get better at telling the stories and motivating Americans to want to see these places, I think there is huge promise in building out that connection, which is really what we're looking for. And zoos and aquariums are a huge opportunity. People here, young kids, I'm sure many people here spend a lot of time at museums, zoos, or in aquariums, and their young minds are so attracted to sharks and so attracted to the stories that they see in those places that it really can be used as a doorway into the protected areas that we have. So you can see many campaigns or education processes where the marine sanctuaries would partner with many, always have that, and to start to always have that connection between what's happening in the ocean and what's happening when we're communicating with the public. So over time, I think we will make great progress. I'm not sure I could say that we're going to actually get to the park status. Maybe that's my flat hat speaking.
That's okay. We have a lot of work to do, everybody. Hope you ate your Cheerios this morning. So another question related is, what is the biggest issue that you see facing marine protected areas today as an important part of our strategy to build resilience in the ocean, and how do we resolve it?
Depending on who you talk to, is an answer. Certainly in view, and we is a big issue, and we hear about it both when we're talking to folks on the Hill and with the State Department and with others across the administration. So funding for enforcement when it comes to marine protected areas is a huge issue, and we know that Secretary Kerry has launched his Sea Scout program, and we're hopeful to see more energy put into that effort. But I think as we talk to the leaders on the Hill and they want to see that these areas are protected, we know when we have science going on, when we're actually analyzing areas, it does help. So I see that with enforcement as well. So I see that as the key to sort of getting folks more on board to having a real story about how these places will be protected far into the future.
Okay, it looks like we just have time for one quick question, so I'll jump on the comment about Senator Kerry's Sea Scout program and ask you about illegal fishing. It's obviously an issue that the president has raised related to global food security, and I wonder if you could talk about the administration's progress in combating IUU.
We're making progress. So we got the proposed rule out in February, which was a huge step. And the team, I want to say thanks to WIT and the team at CEQ that worked with many folks across the administration to do that. We are now processing the comments and some of the really big questions about how we make sure that we really focus on what implementation looks like and how far we can get. Not only in this administration, we want to finalize that rule, obviously, before we're gone, but then beyond us, what are some of the targets that we can put out there for others to reach? I just would say on illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing, the issue and the big win that we had with port state measure to that, so we and other countries signing on to that, so we now have an international collective agreement that we're going to address this at our ports is a huge step, and some of what we get out of that will help in whatever we're able to finalize here in the IUU rule in the coming months.
That's great. More power to you. We certainly need that attention and energy. And to all of you, Ocean Energizing, please join me in thanking Christy Goldfuss for taking the time to be with us today. Now we have a quick break, I think for 15 minutes, Shannon. And so we encourage you to go look at the exhibits and to figure out how you're going to resolve those challenges that Christy put in front of us all. Thank you very much, and we'll see you right back here at 11:15.